Okay, so here's where we left off right there. We had our wonderful game here where our guy would just fall down to the ground. And we're going to add some controls so that using the arrow keys, maybe the space bar, we can make this thing walk back and forth and jump. And we're going to do that with using a script. And so, maybe you haven't seen a whole lot of code before, you haven't coded C# or you haven't written any code in Unity. Don't worry about it. We'll take it kind of slow, and I'll show you how each of these pieces work. So we'll probably write like maybe 15 lines of code or something like that. It's not going to be very long, but we'll take it one step at a time. So inside of our assets window, I'm going to right click and say create C# script, and we will call this thing, I don't know, player controller. And now we've got it here. When we click on it, now that it's selected down here, we click on it over the inspector, it's going to show us some kind of code over here of what's going on. I'm just going to double click on it, and it'll open it up inside of Mono Develop. And this is sort of, it comes with these default things that are happening. Here's our class name, player controller, based on the file name. Make sure when you created this file name, you didn't use spaces. If you use a space here, it's not going to use a space in the class name because you can't do that. And then everything is going to start complaining because your file name is different than your class name. So if you did use a space down here, delete the space out of it, rename it. And you can just do that by clicking inside of here. Now you can go in and edit. But the name of this file needs to match the class name, otherwise all sorts of things get upset. So yeah, make sure you do that. Now there's two methods that are inside of here. There is start. That's what's going to get called as soon as this script starts running, obviously, I guess. Update is called once per frame. It tells us right inside of here. And once per frame, I think the default is 60 frames a second. So update's going to get called 60 times a second. So anyways, we have our code here. We have our red player. And what we want to do is we want to be able to write the script called player controller and have it only affect this red object that we have here. And so what we need to do is we need to attach this script right here to our red object. And let's see, mine was like this. So over in your inspector, once you select your red object, you need to get some blank space over here so you can add in your player controller. If you click these little expand buttons, it'll give you a nice empty gray area over here, and that'll allow you to drag your player controller script into it. And so now your red guy has a player controller script. And this is where we're going to write all the code that handles all the arrows. Now notice that the black platform here does not have a player controller script, and that is because we don't want that thing to move when we use the arrow keys. We can add all kinds of different scripts to this that we want to use, but for now we just want to use the arrow keys, and so we're going to make sure that our script is attached to our red character, and we just, by doing that, we just drag this thing over here. Okay, so now that this player controller script is attached to our red object, any code we write inside of this is going to affect the red object. So let me go back to Mono Develop. So I'm going to just write in a line of code here that shows you how to check and see if there's anything happening on the keyboard. So I will say something like if input.get key, and we will say keycode dot right arrow. And then we'll say move right. Okay, so yeah, basically we just said, is the right arrow down? And if it is down, we want to move our character to the right. Sort of makes sense. We don't have this function written yet, move right. We'll do that now. And then we'll do a move left, and then we'll do a jump. So we'll say void move right. And inside of here, we are going to put our code that will move our character to the right. And so a couple of things that we need to know before we do that. We need to know, how to refer to the position of our object on the screen. So if we look at our red object, it has a position right here, X, that we can move it around. And essentially what we want to do is if the right key is being pressed, we want to add to this X value. That'll move it to the right. And if the left is being pressed, we want to subtract to it, and that's going to move it left this way. So I guess maybe we haven't talked a whole lot about coordinates and x and y, but your x values are going to represent your position horizontally, and then your y value will represent the position of your object vertically. So between the two of those, you give yourself a point on the screen to draw your object. And right now, we're just working with the left and right arrows. So really what we need to do is we need to know where our object is right now, and then if the red or if the right key is being pressed, we need to just add a little bit to it and move it over. And that's what we need to do. So we just need to figure out where we're at, add a certain amount to it, and then save our values, and it'll look like our guy is moving to the right. This is under the transform section, is where our position is. So I'm going to say vector2 position equals transform dot position. Okay. So what I'm doing here is creating a temporary variable that's going to hold our current position. Then we're going to modify that, and then we will set our position back. So transform, little t, make sure this is a lowercase t. This is referring to the specific transform that's associated with this object. Okay, so it's referring to this section over here. And we want to mess around with position, so we're going to say vector2 position equals transform.position. So our new vector2, which contains an x and a y, because in 2D that's all we care about, is going to be set equal to this position. Now I can say position dot x plus equals 1. Let's just do that. So we're going to add 1 to our x if the right key is being pressed, and then we will say transform dot position equals position. Okay, so now we've modified this one to say, all right, we're going to move 1 to the right, and then we will set it back. So as soon as we do this, essentially, our little guy is going to move to the right. And save it. Make sure you save this thing. And when we go back, let's see what happens. Oh, errors. Okay, so this is good. I have a typo, so I tried to run it, and it complained, oh, you've got all these kinds of errors. You can click on your console tab, and it's actually going to tell you the line number where you have the error. So right here, it's and you also get a status update down here, but it's complaining on line 22, the name position does not exist, and this is all spelt goofy. So I can just double click on this, and it'll bring me here and show me that this is where I'm at. Position. Now I can save it. Hopefully this error goes away, and then we can run. Okay, good. So we haven't actually broken anything yet because our thing still falls from the sky. Now, hopefully, when I push the right arrow, this thing should move to the right. And there it goes. Pretty cool. There we go. So that worked out pretty good, and it wasn't a whole lot of code. All we really did was we got our current position, and we added 1 to it. We'll figure out what this 1 is in a second, but for now we're just going to add 1 to it. And then we set it back to, we set our current position equal to this temporary variable that we've created. And so we can do the same thing for a function called move left, right? I'm just going to copy and paste because we know this thing works. And we'll call it move left. And it's going to be the same thing, except when we want to move left, remember, watch our x values here, they're getting smaller. So that's really the only difference between move left and move right, is that our values are getting smaller. So instead of a plus equals, I will just do a minus equals. Get smaller by 1. And also up here, we need to do copy and paste, and we will change this to a left arrow. And we will say, instead of move right, we will say move left. Looks good. Let's run it. And now I can go to the right, and I can go to the left. Now this thing is kind of going, a little bit fast. we need to adjust the speed. So one thing that's kind of cool that we can do, we can keep coming here. So let's make it go slower. We can say this is 0.1 and this is 0.1. And it's going to want us to declare this thing as a float, so 0.1f. And then as we run it, now it's going to be slower. And that's actually pretty smooth. But it's still not the ideal way to do it because we don't really know what these values are. So we can add a variable called public float speed. Let's call it horizontal speed. And we'll set it equals 1. Then instead of this plus equals 0.1 business, we can just plus equals horizontal speed. And minus equals horizontal speed. And the coolest part about this, so this may look, maybe this is sort of a waste of time, but the cool thing about it is if I go back to Unity, now over here on the right, we've got this horizontal speed variable. So I can run this thing and be like, oh, that's way too fast. Let me change this to 0.5. And okay, that looks a little bit better. Well, how about we can make it 0.01? And oh, that's way too slow. So maybe 0.1 is where we want it to be. And that looks pretty good. So we can play around with these things without having to stop and rerun the whole stupid thing. It also sort of makes a wall between the coding piece and the interface piece. So whoever's designing the game in this Unity editor may not be the same person who's writing the code, might not even understand how to write code, but they understand how to tweak these values. And so as a programmer, you can build all these these public variables in here so that the person who's actually developing the game inside the editor will be able to tweak these things and make it perform how they want to without really caring how the underlying code works. So now check this out. This is a 0.1. As soon as I unplay, it's going to jump back to 1 because anything you change while the game is running doesn't get saved. So if you want it to be a 0.1, you have to change it when you're not playing. Notice this thing, unplay it. Now if I put a 0.1 in here, now it's going to stay the same. And when I get into the game, it's still going to be a 0.1. And when I get out, it's still going to be a 0.1. So there we go. So now we've got our guy going back and forth like this, and it looks really nice. All right, so one more thing I want to do in this little video is add the ability to jump. And so we kind of already know how to do some of this stuff, right? We've already got a pattern happening here. So I'm going to copy and paste. And we are going to say if input.get key, call this thing space, and then we want to jump. Okay, now one thing that I'm going to change this to a get key down. And the reason is, so we can hold the right arrow and our guy will move to the right as long as we have the arrow pressed. Same thing with left. Generally in games, it's not how you work with jump. With jump, you hit it once and your guy jumps. It's not like you hold the jump button down for as long as you want as he moves up. I mean, if that's the kind of control that you want, then go ahead and put it in there. But for this one, we want to be able to just hit the button once and have our guy jump. So I switched that to get key down. So what that means is this code is only going to happen once as soon as you press the key. As opposed to these ones that are happening every single update because they're just checking to see if the key is down, not if it has just went down. And that's the difference. And then there's also another thing you can use if you want get key up, which will fire once the key is released. Okay, so we'll say void jump. And I'm going to show you some neat little tricks. So we could do something like this. Just copy and paste our code. And instead of .x, we could do something like .y. And that'll have a similar effect to what we've done before. But I want to show you a different way to do that. Let's get rid of all this stuff. So we have, in our little red guy, we have a rigid body, and this thing is our physics object. And so one thing that we can do is we can add a force to our rigid body that makes it sort of just go up in the air. So I can say something like get component, and we want to get a rigid body 2D, right? Because here's our red guy. We have a rigid body 2D here. So get component rigid body 2D, and then we can say .add force, and it's going to ask us how we want to add force. Now we can add force in the horizontal direction. We can add it up or down, or or both. We can add force at an angle, but for now we just want to go up. So we will say add force. It wants a vector 2, so I'll say new vector 2. And inside of here, it's going to take two values. One is how much force to add in the x direction, and we don't want anything. And then the other one is how much force to add in the y direction. So let's just make up a number. Let's just say 100. And we'll close it out. So now, in just one line of code, we are adding a force of 0 in the x and of 100 in the y. And if we run, let's see what happens. Okay, left and right still work. And now I hit the space bar, and I can hit, if I keep pounding on the space bar, and get this thing to move up. But maybe we want him to jump a little bit higher than that. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'll say, let's add a public variable. We'll call it vertical speed, and we'll start at 100 since that's what we have down here. And then I'll copy and paste it, save it, and then now when we go over, we should get a vertical speed thing here. Here it is. That's set at 100. And so when I run, hit the space bar. Let's make this thing bigger. I don't know. Let's just type it in. How about 500? Whoa, that's a little high. So maybe 250. And sometimes you just gotta kind of guess and check some of these numbers. That doesn't look too bad. There we go. That's a nice looking jump. You can even jump twice. You can jump 100 times. So that's a piece of code that you can put in if you want to sort of manage only doing 2 jumps. Different ways to do that. You can check your vertical velocity. You can check if you've collided with this thing on the bottom. That'll help you know if you've come back down. You can set a timer that says you can only push this button twice, and then you wait a second before you can press it again. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can handle limiting yourself to a double jump, but for right now we're not going to bother doing that. But this is what I wanted to get through in this little video. We've got a nice little script that's a player controller that handles jumping and left and right movement, building on our existing project that had box colliders and rigid bodies so that this thing can actually move around. So that's all that I wanted to get through in this video.